Okay, we have one more than normal.
62.
47.
47. Sometimes these trisomies are called in humans 47 syndrome because we have 47 chromosomes. Now, in Down syndrome, 21 is such a just a not very important chromosome. It has so few proteins on it that you can survive if you have an extra one. In other words, the embryo can develop with that, but it does. I think we talked about some developmental disorders. There's a slower development mentally. The physical development is partially impaired. The bone density of the skull is different, and that helps to lead to a difference in the location and size of the eyes, which is usually the easiest identifying mark for Down syndrome, is smaller eyes wide apart. Margaret, do you have a question?
Yeah, how is 321's 47? What is it?
Okay, so you have 2 of everything else, right? And you have 23 total. So for 22 pairs, you have 2 chromosomes, right? That's 44. But for 21, you have 3. That gives you 47
Oh, instead of 2.
instead of 2.
Okay.
Sarah?
Don't they normally have like fat gums too?
It can lead to other developmental issues like that. An increase, it's a change in the jaw size can affect the size of the tongue as well. But generally, it's the eyes that are the easiest defining marks. But the skull structure in general is more different. And generally, because of the increased bone density, they tend to be a little heavier and a little shorter.
Why is it that like it's like a lot less noticeable when they're younger?
Because it's a developmental problem. So what happens is their development is changed. And so as they develop, the changes become more and more obvious as they're not developing the way a normal child would.
What in the eyes? Like, are they? You said that eyes were like the most determining factor.
Well, so they're generally smaller and wider.
Okay, because I know how it looks. I wouldn't know how to.
Right. Generally, it's smaller eyes. The eyes themselves are actually smaller. The sockets in the skull are actually smaller. You can tell if someone has Down syndrome from a skull, right? When they find skulls in ancient buried boneyards, they can tell if an individual had Down syndrome from the shape of the skull. So this is the one we're probably most familiar with. But trisomy 21 is still relatively important. I mean, 21 is still relatively important. What's the least important as far as survival chromosome? Which chromosome?
Sex.
The sex chromosomes, right? The 23rd chromosome. They are the least important. And it turns out there are a couple different ways to have a trisomy of the sex chromosome. The first one is going to be Klinefelter's. Klinefelter's is actually called 47XY, and it is an XXY. Okay, Klinefelter's is XXY. Once again, that's 47 total chromosomes because we have an extra gene in there, extra chromosome there. Morphologically, in other words, in their appearance, people with Klinefelter's would look like which gender?
Female.
Girl.
Boys.
Male.
Boys,
Why?
right?
Because they have a
Everyone by default is female, unless you have a Y chromosome.
Uh,
So what does this individual have? A Y chromosome.
Is he just really feminine or something?
No, because in women, what normally happens is one of their X's doesn't even activate. So it's not, in fact, the X chromosome doesn't make you feminine at all, right? Because all boys have an X chromosome. It's just that humans are, at their base, originally female. And if you have a Y, it's the default for humans. The default for all mammals is female. But if you have a Y chromosome, then you become masculine. So humans by default are female, right? All humans start off female, and then if you have the Y gene, it starts turning the female form male, the feminine to the masculine. Okay. So these individuals are masculine. Now they tend to occasionally have some fertility problems. They are on occasion they'll have some very, very, very slight developmental issues. But really, having 3 sex chromosomes is not really that detrimental. Aside for some fertility problems, there aren't any major symptoms. You can also have a triple X, which means you have what? 3 X's. These individuals would appear what?
female.
Yeah, they'd be female. There is no Y. They say that way. Now, aside from some studies that suggest they might have some developmental issues, they may have a slightly lower IQ than average, but once again, those studies are so indefinite, it might not be artifacts at all. These individuals tend to live relatively normal lives. In fact, it's postulated, or people think that as many as maybe 20% of females may be triple X without knowing it. Others think it's much lower, at like 1 or 2% at the most. You'd have a DNA test, but since it's generally symptomless, there's no reason to get tested for it. Now, it's probably fairly rare.
Is it recessive or dominant?
Well, that's the thing. It's not really either. It's just how many chromosomes you get,
Oh.
right? So let's say you have, let's say your mother has the triple X, right?
Mhm.
So if you're a boy and you get this, you have Klinefelters, right? And if
Yeah.
you're a girl and you get this, then you're going to be triple
Wait,
X.
what's normal?
But I thought
What do you
triple
mean?
X was X, or Klinefelter's was XXY.
Right, because
Oh.
this is going to be from mom. What's
Yeah.
dad going to give you if you're a boy?
OY.
A Y. If you get this one, if you're a boy or girl, you're normal. Typical.
So you have 2X's, or normal is either 2X's or an X and a Y.
That's right. That's right. But this right here, this triple X syndrome, doesn't seem to have really much of a symptom at all. They seem to be able to reproduce without, once again, the studies are indefinite on this. It's hard to know exactly how many people have this trait, but it's not too detrimental. And then finally, what is sometimes called the super male. They do not have powers. They're not even all that especially masculine, despite some early studies that had some confused numbering. But the XYY is 2 Y chromosomes. Okay, it's 2 Y chromosomes. This comes from a kind of extra copy in a non-disjunction. It's rather rare. Aside from the fact that these individuals are slightly taller and maybe not a little more aggressive, there's a study actually of a prison population that found that 35% of the prisoners actually had this. And it was assumed that this is a leading cause of violent crimes. But then every other prison that's been studied has not seen anywhere near the same effect. It's just this one strange prison, which happens to have a weird concentration of these individuals with XYY syndrome, or what's often called 47Y syndrome. And this is going to be, of course, these individuals are going to be male. They have 2Y. You would think they'd actually have more testosterone, but interestingly, they often have testosterone deficiencies later in life. Although they are on average a little bit taller and may or may not be a little more aggressive. Testosterone is the aggression hormone. When you see that sweet little 6th grader who sings and runs around and plays with the girl, and then 3 months later in 7th grade he's standing there going ugh and shoving another 7th grader for an hour, unclear on what they're doing or why they're doing. They just know they must shove. That's because testosterone has just turned on in the brain.
Why you look at
Right.
me? I'm not in 7th grade, or I don't shove people.
I'm still confused on like why
what's
some
wrong
of
with
them
shoving
have like
people?
3 letters and some like the X, X, Y, or like.
Okay, so all of these trisomies have 3, right? Klinefelter's is XXY, right? Triple X is XXX, and then XYY syndrome is, well, XYY.
So normal is dice.
Right, so we don't even name it, right? You have 2 homologous chromosomes, that's normal. That's right. So girls are XX, boys
So
are
why do
XY.
they 3? I don't understand.
Same way from non-disjunction, right? Remember we talked about this.
And it like grabs on or whatever.
So when there's a tetrad,
Uh-huh.
what's supposed to happen is one's supposed to go to each side. But if you don't grab on one side and grab on the other, this side will get 2 when they split, right? You'll have a cell like this, and you'll have a cell without the chromosome in it, because
So
both
that
went to
one
one
has
side.
1, because 2 on that side and 1 on that. Doesn't it start with 4?
Well, in my original drawing, you're right, I did it like this. So if these don't disconnect, but these do, you'll have one go that way, one go that way, one here, one here. That's originally how I drew it.
Oh.
And so if this cell reproduces, right, it'll get another chromosome from the mate.
Okay.
And if this cell reproduces, you get a trisomy.
Okay.
If this cell reproduces, you get a
Mm.
monosomy, because you only get one from the mate.
Okay.
Okay, so like if the top one grabbed on one side and the other side didn't grab on, and so that one got 2, but it was the opposite on the bottom, and like.
So
that-
if that did happen, so let's say we had some, like, both little x's here, both big x's here, you would have, if this cell reproduced, you'd have a monosomy here and a trisomy here, which is guaranteed in humans to be lethal. This would not develop. Same thing here.
Okay. So it wouldn't be the same as
Yeah, that's right. You can't, while you can survive if you have like a trisomy of 21, you cannot survive if there's a trisomy of 21 and a monosomy.
Okay.
Even if it's Turner's monosomy. It's too messed up, too much protein imbalance. Okay, now monosomy and trisomy can both exist in animals, but the last thing we're going to look at, polyploidy, can only exist in things like plants and fungi, and paramecium, the protists, in other words, which we'll talk about next semester. Polyploidy, and by the way, this is how we've made all the fruits you like to eat, right? All the fruits you eat didn't exist 2,000 years ago, with the exception of a pomegranate. It probably was about the same 2,000 years ago, which is, if you've ever eaten a pomegranate, you know how small the actual fruit is, right?
Yes.
It's just a whole bunch of them in there. That's closer to an original fruit. But none of the fruit you eat today exists. In fact, most of the fruit you eat today didn't exist 200 years ago.
An apple
They didn't
that
have
had
grapes.
Not the kind of, so seedless grapes that you like to eat? Yeah, they definitely didn't have those, right?
Seeds?
But we have seed grapes.
You can, but even those are different. They're a lot bigger. Has anyone ever eaten a wine grape?
Yeah, the little tiny ones.
They are not sweet at all, right? They're actually quite bitter. But yeah, I mean, like, and they have really thick skin. That's closer to original grapes. Like wine grapes aren't sold in stores, right?
Yeah.
You'd have to be at a vineyard to eat one.
Never mind, I've had them.
But those are wild grapes. Have you ever actually eaten a wild grape from an actual vine?
Had a muscadine.
Right. So those are like, they're more like berries, right?
Yeah, I
And
had
they-
that.
and they have really thick skin.
Yeah.
That's closer to what they were. But even those vine grapes, those wine grapes, have been messed with by people for as long as there's been wine, which is a very long time, right? So all the fruits we eat are, I mean, the best example of this is corn, which is technically a fruit. I know it's strange.
Because I see.
Corn is actually, you know those little grass stalks, the little black things on them? That's what corn used to be until we got a hold of it, right?
Like the weeds.
Yeah, because corn's grass.
Amy always said that, and I made fun of her. She said, "No, Mr. Miller said it's true," and I was like, "I still don't believe that." Because she would just pick it up and go, "Here, this used to be corn."
Yeah, that's not exactly how it works, but yeah, it would take a couple hundred generations to make corn out of that, but that's the idea.
Oh wait, when they made wine back then, were there seeds in their wine?
Well, no, you crush the grapes, right,
You step on it.
and you filter out all the solids.
Or so they had like filters and stuff?
Yeah, or they handpick them out.
Ew.
Yeah, that's like
Okay, she just said
What did
that.
they crush them with?
She just said that she made fun of Emmy for something that you had said. But can I ask you about something that Jack apparently asked you, and your answer?
Let's get through this.
All right.
Is it about what we're talking about right now?
No, not at all.
Okay, well, hold on to that. Okay, so polyploidy is when we have tons and tons of extra chromosomes, not just a trisomy.
Poly means many.
That's right. But if you remember that fern we looked at that had 1,200 chromosomes, that's a polyploid plant. And so when we make the fruits we like over the millennia, as we've manipulated which fruits get to breed and which don't, we have made them copy their sugar genes over and over and over and over again, which is why you can actually get, if you've ever gotten that, what's it called? There's a strain of the sweet silver corn. The sweet silver corn, if you get that, that has more sugar than an apple does. Have you ever had that really sweet corn? It's delicious if you grill it. It's absolutely
Are you
fantastic.
talking about the little things?
No, those are
No, not baby corn. This is just a
It's like
species of
almost
corn.
white, it's so
A species,
yellow. I mean,
yes,
so
yeah,
white.
that's sweet corn. That's
Yeah,
really,
I
really
know,
white.
so that's-
It has so much starch and so much
Yeah.
sugar
My
in
mom
it.
makes casserole out of it.
And it's delicious, but it's pretty much candy, right? It has almost as much sugar
Not when she cooks it.
as like candy does. So, and the way we made it so sweet is by making the sugar chromosomes polyploid, copying them over and over again. Plants have no problem with this because plants develop differently than animals do. Plants don't have digestive systems or respiratory systems. In
Or
fact, they
feelings.
are asystemic. So they don't need a complex protein concentration to know where to grow, say, a stomach as opposed to a heart. Animals need that, and if you have a protein imbalance in any way because of your chromosome imbalance, you're going to have the wrong concentration, the wrong organ systems grow. If a tree grows a branch in the wrong spot, no big deal, right?
What about the chloroplast?
What about the chloroplast?
Doesn't it need?
Okay, so it'll have protein, but it just needs to have a certain amount. It doesn't need a certain proportion of protein, right? If you have too many proteins for chlorophyll and more water, so in other words, you don't have enough water to make all that chlorophyll, you just won't make the chlorophyll and the plant won't die. If you don't have enough proteins to tell you where to form a heart, that animal will never get formed. Does that make sense? So the polyploid is going to be found only in plants and some of the simpler eukaryotic organisms, not in the majority of animals. Okay. Any questions on that?
Nope.
All right, let's go over our homework, and then you can ask any review questions. Francie,
Yes.
your hands up.
I'm sorry.
Can I ask you my question really quick?
Let's get through this anyway. Okay, number one, Francie, since you were begging to go first and raising your hand, an organism that has true breeding for a trait is said to be blank.
A homozygous.
What?
Homozygous.
Homozygous, not
Dominant.
homozygous.
Dominant.
That, you're actually right. It needs to be homozygous dominant is what that should say. So that's a better answer than what the book says. Homozygous dominant. Because if it's homozygous recessive, it can't be true breeding, right? Those traits will be covered
There's
up.
another one that I had an issue with.
Well, hopefully we'll get to it soon.
What was the answer to number one?
A, homozygous, but a better answer would be homozygous dominant, which it doesn't give you as a choice. At the end of meiosis, how many haploid cells have been formed from the original cell, Sarah?
D4?
That's right, 4, because meiosis is 1 diploid into
4 haploids.
4 haploids. What's mitosis?
One diploid.
1 to 2.
1 diploid and 2 diploids. Very good. 3, when Mendel transferred pollen from one pea plant to another, he was blank the plants.
B. Cross-pollinated.
He was cross-pollinating. That's right, thank you. A short pea plant is blank, Isabel.
A, homozygous recessive.
Yeah, homozygous recessive, that's right. So for most of the traits that we'll talk about on your test, you won't have to know what's dominant and recessive, but we spent so much time on pea plants, you do need to know what's dominant and recessive on pea plants, okay? Other organisms, you don't have to know. Number 5, which of these shows a dominant trait in garden peas? And this is a little misleading. What it means is which of these shows only a dominant trait in garden peas?
Oh, I
Dr.
put
Clark?
C because it was round.
Ah, but it's green.
What?
And green's actually recessive.
So is it D?
It is. The purple flower is the only one that shows.
He's the only one that's a pea. That's a cucumber thing. That's a flower.
Nope, these are all. So A is a wrinkled pea.
Why is
B
D?
is a pea pod. C is a round pea. D is a pea flower.
I didn't know those were peas.
Well,
Why?
it's actually in the book. All those pictures are described in the initial part when they talk about all the flowers and peas and whatnot on page 262.
Why is D? Like what is that? Is it
It's a purple
actually-
flower.
Oh, because it's purple.
So everybody take a look at page 262.
Purple's dominant over white.
262. Oh, right. By the way, all of these traits are listed for you at the beginning of your notes, the dominant on the left, recessive on the right, but here they are shown to you in picture form right there. Okay, during what phase of meiosis do sister chromatids separate? So when are we going to split apart an X in meiosis? Kaylee,
Anaphase?
which anaphase? Remember we have two of them.
First, second.
Actually, it's the second one.
Okay.
And the first anaphase, remember, we're going to pull the X's apart. In second anaphase, we split the X in half. And that would be, what would that be? C, anaphase 2.
Wait. Yes.
I'm waiting.
I thought it meant that it quote unquote like I was thinking like anaphase one, but that was not.
Right, okay, so a chromatid is a half an X, right? The chromosome is the full X. So when do we separate chromatids? When do we split an X in half? That's anaphase 2. Okay, in anaphase 1, we pull the X's apart from each other. But in anaphase 2, we split the X's in half.
I thought they just separated from like four.
Right, but the chromatids stay together because we get, if you remember, we still have X's after anaphase, in anaphase 1. In anaphase 2, though, we split those X's in half because anaphase 2 is the same as mitosis. And in mitosis, in anaphase, we split the chromosome in half.
So chromatid is half of an X.
A chromatid is half an X.
Okay.
Chromosome, the X. Homologous chromosomes, 2 chromosomes that have the same genes. All right. During what phase of meiosis do homologous chromosomes cross over? When does crossing over happen, John Michael?
Prophase 1.
In prophase 1, that's right. And maybe a little bit in metaphase 1 too, but prophase 1 primarily. Recessive traits appear only when an organism is blank. Catherine,
D.
what does D say?
Homozygous.
That's right. Only when it's homozygous for the trait.
Is it meaning in the offspring?
Okay,
Because
so
you can have recessive and heterozygous if you have like big.
not it won't look recessive though. The
Oh,
trait
okay.
won't appear.
Okay.
So when it says trait appear, it's not
Okay.
talking about our genotype. We're talking about our
Something like
phenotype.
that.
All right. Mendel's use of peas was a good choice for genetic study because they blank. Aaron.
D.
That's right. They're lots of offspring, easy to grow, and they self-pollinate. A dihybrid cross, so that's two traits, between two heterozygous parents produces a phenotype ratio of what? So if we have two heterozygous traits for two parents, what's our ratio going to be, Brianne?
B? No,
Okay, so A would be right if they were monohybrid, right? If we had big T, little t, little t, but these are dihybrids. So they're going to be big T, little r, big T, big R, little t, little r, little t, big R, right? They're dihybrid. So how many squares are we going to have if they're dihybrid? We're going to have 4 by 4, which should give us 16. So what's it going to be there? What's our, if we do a dihybrid cross, what's our ratio going to be? It's actually that 9 to 3 to 3 to 1, right? 9 to 3 to 3 to 1. If you remember when we cross-pollinated the F2 generation in the Mendel experiment, we got that 9 tall and round, 3 tall and wrinkled, 3 short and round, 1 short and wrinkled.
If it had just been big T, little t, big T, little t, would it have been 3 to 1?
Mm-hmm. But it says dihybrid.
Yeah.
Remember, dihybrid's two traits. Okay, if two heterozygous organisms for a single dominant trait, so now we're back to monohybrid. Murray, what's this ratio going to be?
3 to 1.
That's a 3 to 1 because we have only one trait. Okay.
So,
Do you have a question, Margaret?
I got 2 to 1.
That would be the ratio for genotypes, right? That'd be homozygous, homozygous dominant 1, heterozygous 2, homozygous recessive 1. But this is asking for the way it looks.
She never said that.
Dominant
That was
trait.
the one I had problem
That's
with.
true. You're right.
That's
It doesn't
the one I
say
had
that. So if you put 1 to 2 to 1 there, I wouldn't count it all.
Dang it, that's what I had.
You mean 2 to 1?
That was the one I had.
It's the same thing, right?
Okay.
So I was
So I would take that. You're right. If it said phenotype, though, so if we had, so we have big T, big T, big T, little t, big T, little t, little t, little t. That's 1 to 2 to 1 genotype. But what's that going to look like?
tall, short.
So that's a 3 to 1 phenotype. But you're right. The question doesn't actually make it clear what it's asking you about, does it?
Oh.
So either one would work.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yes.
So when you're writing a ratio, does it matter like if you have 3 or more numbers in which order the numbers are?
You know, not really. I guess the general rule is biggest to smallest, but if you put 1 to 2 to 1, it's the same as 2 to 1 to 1.
So you wouldn't like count off if our answer is the same, but you're gonna keep
Well, it's a bit like if I asked you a question and you said 1/2, and I was like, nope, wrong, stupid, it's 50%. Right?
That one I
It's the same thing.
Oh, it's 7
Yeah. No, that's a good question, but it really is the same sort of thing.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. All right. A trait is hidden in the heterozygous condition. A trait that is hidden in the heterozygous condition is said to be a blank trait. Which trait would not show up? Margaret, is it your turn?
I think so. The recessive?
That'd be a recessive trait. Oh, I thought you were shocked. Recessive, I've heard of that. An organism that has 2 different alleles is going to be what, Amy?
Heterozygous.
Say it again.
Heterozygous.
Heterozygous, that's right. I remember that. It is heterozygous. The process that results in Down syndrome is called what, Karis? It is a trisomy, but the process that results in a trisomy is non-disjunction. Remember, it's when the X's don't split apart. So it is a trisomy, but since it said process, it actually wanted non-disjunction. It's a little misleading question. No, disjunction is what normally happens. Non-disjunction is when something goes wrong. All right, Francie. Species has 46 chromosomes. When it does meiosis, how many will these cells have?
23.
Right, because the cells are haploid.
Yeah.
So they have half.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, can you?
Oh, okay, so what does meiosis do? Oh, okay. 4 haploid cells. If the diploid has 46, each haploid will have.
I was multiplying.
Okay, so the question is, will each have? How many in each cell?
I thought half of this all one cell. Okay.
Oh, no, okay, so you have 4 haploid cells.
Oh, so it'll be.
1, 2, 3, 4. Each one of them, because it's haploid, in fact, no matter what the other numbers say, so if I say, I have 8,000 cells that are diploid with a diploid count of 2, and they are undergoing 18 meioses.
Oh my gosh.
How many chromosomes will the cells have?
4,000.
No. Will each cell have? So the diploid had 2, haploid will have. All that other information had nothing to do with
I
it.
thought you said it had 8,000.
Yeah, so there are 8,000 cells.
Oh, 8,000 cells.
Each had 2. They all undergo meiosis.
One.
Because the diploid and haploid, no matter what the other numbers are, have the same relationship. Haploid's half of whatever diploid is. Does that make sense?
So the number of cells then.
Not for the number of chromosomes in each cell. The diploid haploid always holds true. Okay? Whatever diploid is half of that.
But I thought it said somewhere that haploids have 4.
Okay. Meiosis takes one cell. That cell is a diploid cell. It takes one house, say with 4 people in it, right? And it's going to make 4 houses, but there'll be half houses. So each house will have 2 people. The 4 is the number of cells, not the number of things inside the cell. So, and no matter how many haploid cells I end up with, haploid is always half a diploid. If you know what diploid is, half of that is haploid.
Yeah, I started getting into when you started talking about houses.
Okay, well just remember, diploid is twice as many as,
Haploid.
that's all I need to know.
Twice as many as a haploid?
And haploid's half as many as a diploid. That's actually a law of math, right? If 2 is twice as much as 1, 1 is half as much as 2. That's the definition.
But I thought you said one diploid is 2 haploids. That's the first thing.
Okay.
The first thing.
Meiosis turns one diploid,
Into 2 haploids.
that's one cell,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
One cell,
Everybody.
and it turns into 4 cells.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the overall process of meiosis. Meiosis 1 only gets us to how many?
2 haploids.
So how do we get to 4?
With meiosis 2. Yeah.
But they're still haploids. Haploids always means half the diploid. Okay. So let's say I start off with one cell that is, and it has 50 chromosomes. Okay. After meiosis 1, how many does each haploid cell have? Okay, what does haploid mean?
You do.
What does haploid mean?
I'm not sure.
It means half. Do you want it?
Yeah.
I can't
So-
tell it to you.
Well, so the diploid number was 50.
Yeah.
What will haploid be?
Oh, 25.
Okay, after meiosis 2,
you get my
what will the haploids have?
5.
No.
It said important.
What?
Haploids always have how many?
Half a diploid.
Half a diploid. What was the diploid?
25.
No, okay,
No,
so
50.
50. So all the haploids, no matter when they show up, will have 25.
Yeah.
That's always true.
Okay.
Okay. You can ignore how many cells there are. The haploid, whatever the diploid number is, the haploid will be half.
Oh, so in meiosis 1, if it's that, if it's the 50, at the end of meiosis 2, the haploids will still be 25?
Because they're haploids. And that's the rule, right? And remember, meiosis 2 just made copies. It didn't actually divide them in half like meiosis one did.
Okay.
It makes and that's why we say it's identical to mitosis. It made copies.
I have two questions.
Okay.
Is the haploid the gamete?
Gametes are haploid.
And then how do they turn into a diploid?
When a mommy and daddy love each other very much. But literally, that's fertilization, right?
Okay.
The swimming gamete meets the non-swimming gamete, and you add haploid, and get.
So that isn't,
Diploid.
that's not part of meiosis.
Okay, so meiosis makes the gametes.
Yeah.
Fertilization is the meeting of the gametes. And those are very different processes.
That's a little label.
So this is the division. We're going to recombine to get the diploid cell, and that's the zygote.
Meiosis is
Only
what
makes the
happens
gametes.
after fertilization.
No, before. Before you can have a sperm meet an egg, you have to make a sperm, and you have to make the egg. And those are made in meiosis.
Oh, I thought that was the sperm like making.
No, this is so this is one cell.
Uh-huh.
If this is a boy cell, it can only make sperm. If it's a girl cell, it can only make eggs.
I know, okay.
So an individual can't. So one cell can't become a sperm and an egg,
Yeah, I know.
even in those pea plants. They have different areas that make sperm, different areas that make eggs.
Okay, I don't know what I'm trying to ask.
Okay, so meiosis makes the gametes. So the gametes are made in one individual. They then have to find a gamete-bearing other individual, right? Who went through their own meiosis, and then the
Oh, I get
gametes
it.
will fuse.
Okay, I get it.
And yeah, I'm glad you got it before I had to continue my hand motions.
No,
Okay.
I get it because it's happened.
Yeah, good. Okay, I was just making jokes. All right, so let's look at number, where are we? 16. Metaphase 1 of meiosis occurs when blank line up next to each other at the cell's equator. What's going to line up next to each other, Sarah? What kind, though? Are they going to line up in single file? Since we're in meiosis 1,
No.
how are they going to line up?
Against the side, right? Like,
So rather than being one, so single file, they're going to be what kind of file?
horizontal.
So in meiosis, in your picture right there,
Like that?
right, so if you notice there's two next to each other, right? What do we call that?
Tetrad.
A tetrad, right? Or you could say a homologous pair, right? A pair of homologous chromosomes, but that's what the tetrad is, right?
That's when they line up in doubles.
That's the double line, right? So if they line up in doubles because they're homologous chromosomes next to each other, which we call the tetrad.
And then that is the overlapping.
That's a tetrad, right? And the two X's, they're homologous chromosomes because they have the same genes.
Gotcha.
Okay,
Wait, so it has two tetrads?
so a tetrad is two chromosomes.
And
Right.
if there's like 4 chromosomes, they have 2 tetrads?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Because we're gonna separate the tetrads to make our haploid gametes. All right, where are we? Stage of meiosis shown here is what, Elizabeth?
Anaphase 1.
It could be, but if you notice, we've already divided
The telophase.
telophase 1. Right? Does that make sense to everybody?
I thought the splitting was anaphase.
You're right, but once they get to the other side, and we divide the cell, so in anaphase, we pull apart the chromosomes. Telophase, we split the actual cell. Right?
Is that what piece?
Yeah.
It looks different than the rest of them.
Well, so that's telophase, right? Yeah. Well, we went ahead. So imagine these two things stuck together,
Oh, okay.
right? I just drew them apart so we could see them easier. In the first generation of Mendel's experiment with a single trait, the blank trait disappeared, only to reappear the next trait. What trait disappeared in this F1 generation?
Recessive trait?
That's right, the recessive traits.
I said short.
Well, yeah, that was one of the specific recessive traits, though, right? A cell that has successfully completed meiosis has a chromosome number called.
Are you asking for the amount? Because I want to say 46.
Well, that's only in humans, right? We don't know what kind of organism we have here. So if it has half the DNA, we call it.
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
Haploid?
Haploid.
Oh, so it's a diploid.
Okay, so everybody, what does haploid mean?
Half the diploid.
Yeah, half the diploid,
Yeah.
right? So after meiosis, we have half, so its chromosome number is haploid,
Okay.
right?
I looked everywhere.
It's just haploid, okay? Now, what do we call those haploid cells here? Kaylee, that's what the last one's asking. What do we call the haploid cells? Because they're going to fertilize, they're going to join, they're going to marry, gametes, that's right. Remember, gam means marry or join. So these are joining cells, they are gametes, but their DNA is haploid. So we can call them haploid cells, we can call them gametes. Haploid refers to the DNA, gametes really refers to the fact that they'll fertilize, they will join.
So they're not chromosomes?
Cells are never chromosomes. Cells have chromosomes,
Yeah.
right? It's like you have teeth, right? And you have a certain number of teeth, but teeth aren't merged. Okay. Okay, any questions on the homework? Any other questions you want to go? Margaret?
I have two, but they don't all have the same category of genetic variation and genetic recombination.
Okay, so the whole point of meiosis, the whole point of sexual reproduction is to do what? But what kind of kids? No, yeah, but new ones, right? The whole point of meiosis and sexual reproduction is to get new stuff, right? New organisms. So, the genetic variation is the result of meiosis and then recombination. Okay? So imagine you have a deck of cards, right? And they're in order. You can't play a game with them because you know the next card, right? So how do you change them? Well, first you cut them in half, right? And then what do? Recombine them, right? Meiosis is the separating, right? That's when we cut half and half. And then we recombine them. That's genetic recombination. If you remember, we talked about the fact that a human couple has 64 trillion possible offspring from that, right? And so that genetic recombination, the fact that you don't know when each card's going to flip down, means that you can have an incredible number of different orders of the deck. And so genetic recombination is the way of ensuring we always get a new organism, right? There would have to be, there are no, stupid computer, there are no human copies other than identical twins, right? It just doesn't, there's just so many different variations that could happen. Sarah?
Can you explain the difference between mitosis and meiosis 1?
Okay, yeah. So, all the stuff, the spindle, nuclear membrane, all the same. The difference is the chromosomes are going to stick to their homologous chromosomes, right? So, they're going to form tetrads. Tetrad formation changes everything. And that's in prophase.
Okay.
Because, remember, the spindle wants to grab each side of the
Are those
chromosome.
lines of spindles?
Okay. But it can't, right? Because they form tetrads. Because of that, because of the tetrad formation, spindles can only attach to one side of each chromosome. And therefore, in anaphase, we're going to get entire chromosomes, but different chromosomes on each side. So because of this, these cells are different from each other, whereas mitosis would make copies, right? So the tetrad formation means that the two cells produced after meiosis 1 are haploid, but also different from each other.
So, is that why you have to do meiosis twice?
And then we have to do meiosis again in order to get these back to the gametes we need and produce a total of 4 cells.
Okay.
Except meiosis 2 is identical to what?
Mitosis.
Mitosis. Catherine?
Oh, well, that was wait, so
Elizabeth?
So in fertilization, when there's the egg and the sperm, when you have the X, you said a little X, Y, X, whatever. Does the female always produce an X?
Okay, so women only have X's for sex chromosomes, right? So every egg has an X in it. Every sperm has the Y in it. I'm sorry, that's not true. They have either a Y or they have an X. This sperm makes a girl, this sperm makes a boy.
You can't have both.
Actually, only one sperm can fertilize.
But I mean, like one sperm can't have X and Y.
It can.
Is that the trisomy?
And that would make Klinefelters, right?
Oh.
XXY.
And that's trisomy?
And that'd be a trisomy.
But can't you
If
have?
this sperm has
Just
nothing,
takes a picture.
we get Turners.
Right. So it's not possible for them to hit at the exact same time, and then you have like.
So only one sperm can fertilize one egg. And here's the reason why. This is haploid, this is haploid. If one fertilizes it, you get a diploid. If two fertilize it, and we'll see plants actually fertilize twice. you get something called a triploid, and animals can't survive. If we can only survive one trisomy, we can't survive all the trisomies, right?
So it can happen, they just won't survive.
Not in animals, right? Actually, there's a barrier to prevent it from happening. Once the first, not to go into too much
You
detail.
said that a lot this past week.
I
Not
know. There's a barrier around the egg, and the sperm are actually like missiles. They have little warheads full of acids, and so the first couple thousand sperm to hit the egg break down the walls, and then when the wall's broken down, all the sperm who broke it down are dead now. And so about the 1500th sperm makes it through the wall, fertilizes the egg, and then the egg shuts itself down to all other sperm.
Why? What do you mean not to go into? How would that? Should have gone into good detail.
Well, that was less detail. I mean, we didn't follow the whole path,
Oh.
right? So that was
Gotcha.
limited detail.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you do,
Square
can you
stops the video.
explain non-disjunction and non-dual?
I do it at the
All right. So we have our tetrad, right? It's supposed to pull apart in anaphase. If it doesn't, if it only goes one way, one side gets an extra chromosome. Now the other one has not enough chromosome.
Okay, because I have in my notes that one gamete will get both chromosomes and the other will get none.
Yeah, so here, we had it right here, right?
But is that just on the top part?
She just took a
I'll just
picture
get
of
none on
you.
the top part?
No, the top part has nothing to do with it. That's just the place where, so this one didn't, this was non-disjunction, this was disjunction, right? One little x, one little x. Non-disjunction means 2 big X's here, 0 big X's here. Okay, I'm using 4 because I don't want to draw 46. Right?
Oh, so in real life, that many humans, that would be 46?
So there'd be 23 tetrads. In fruit flies, that would be 4 tetrads. I made up an organism that looks like this.
What's the name?
Sure.
Fred.
No, I don't like
Fred.
Fred. No,
Bart.
I don't like Fred.
Bart.
No, that's
Bart.
The Miller organism.
Caesar. That can be Caesar.
That doesn't even.
All right,
No, that's
everybody,
Caesar's
name everyone out there.
Are we done?
Look, I put Caesar concubine in his will.
That's what I
Getting
did.
a little racy now.
I didn't
what
draw
I
Caesar
said.
concubine. Somebody else did.
Hey, Miss Miller, wait, can I ask my
His
question?
wife's getting
How's it
jealous.
coming?
Okay, I have 11 more rows to do, but then I'll be done.
But then
Did
you
you
have to
ever
do
know
it.
if I
Oh, you already.
Can I ask you my question?
You have the ratios right.
Okay, so Jack, I think misunderstood you, and you said something about how long it takes to comprehend what somebody else has said.
What?
You made a statement about the length of time that it takes for you to comprehend what the person you're talking to has said.
It's taking me a minute.
And Jack said, Jack definitely misquoted you in saying that you said it takes 8 seconds to comprehend what somebody else has said to you.
No. Your brain keeps on a couple second lag, where it takes in everything you hear, but doesn't tell you about it, right? So if I say something to you and you go, what? And then suddenly you know what I've said, because your brain has gone back and replayed it, but pretended like you heard it the first time, so you don't think you're crazy, right? And so what happens, you say what, and then it plays in your head, and you're like, oh, so you actually have a little lag in your brain as it decides what's important, because it takes in everything. And then it waits a little while to decide what's important. But if it makes a mistake, it'll run back and try to act like it was paying attention.
My
the
brain
first time.
always used to do that. My brother would say something to me, and I would always say what, no matter what he had said. And then after he said it, I would have already known what he was going to say.
When a boy hits puberty, testosterone floods the brain, and testosterone decreases the importance of social interactions, right? And so the brain gives them a low priority, right? This is why teachers get so frustrated at the boys in their 7th, 8th, and 9th grade classes, because literally what other humans say are less important to their brains. They don't write them down as much. Whereas the girls, when estrogen floods their brains, it's obsessed with what everyone said and what everyone meant at all times, and did you hear them say that? And so that gets top priority. Whereas boys, suddenly objects gain top priority, right? Like, car, right? Or rock. So And so what happens less is what people say, and more